Sorry about that. So I told you I was in the basement. I was cutting wood and I was making this monitor stand. Sawdust in my nose.
Sawdust up your nose.
I started sneezing. I blew my nose. I think I had like a nose hair stuck in my throat or something, which is super bizarre. Good Lord. I went and got like coffee, but I didn't get myself water. But I think coffee's more important than water.
As long as you feel good.
We'll survive. All right. Are you ready?
I am so ready.
You're like, would you just shut up? Get over it. Let's do it. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. The Beyond UX Design shop is open. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to pick up some big, beautiful art prints of some of my favorite UX and software-related quotes. Pick up your copy of Beyond UX Design, Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes. Get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use the code LISTENER to get 10% off your entire order. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop and get your print on. This week's episode is brought to you by Wix Studio. If you're thinking about redoing your portfolio or kicking off a new website project, listen up. I only have 30 seconds to tell you about Wix Studio, the web platform for agencies and enterprises. So here are a few things that you can do from start to finish in 30 seconds or less on Studio. You can adapt your designs for every device with responsive AI. You can jump seamlessly between front end and back end. Speed up projects with AI Code Assistant. You can start a new design library, reuse full stack apps and UI components across multiple sites. So time's up, but the list keeps going. Step into Wix Studio and see for yourself. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Wix to start creating today. This week's episode is sponsored by the UX Playbook, your roadmap to UX career success. Created by my buddy Chris Wynn, UX Playbook offers comprehensive guides on UX fundamentals, portfolio creation, and job hunting. With hundreds of videos, Notion guides, and real-world examples, it's your one-stop shop for career clarity. And because you're an amazing listener, get 10% off their Fast Track bundle using the code BEYOND at checkout. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/playbook and save nearly $25. Pick up the UX Playbook and transform your career from fuzzy to focused. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, and Marty for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're released. And you can get instant access right now to the video archives for as little as $5 a month. For more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing here, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. So at some point in your career, you may start asking yourself if you should start thinking about the management track. Maybe you're a great individual contributor, you've excelled in your craft, and you might think that it's just the logical next step. Hit a certain level IC, and the next step is manager. But these two jobs are very different, and excelling in your craft does not mean that you'll make a great manager. So before you go accepting that management position, it might behoove you to think about the next step and make sure that you're making the right decision. So that's why I've got Alison Gretz on today. She's a career coach, leadership coach, and she knows all about this. So I'm so excited to have Alison on. Alison Gretz is a leadership coach and trainer working at the intersection of the future of how we work on digital products and leading healthy, high-performing teams of humans. Her training offerings include a design leadership accelerator and entry-level manager course. And launching this fall is the Good Manager Operating System, a collaborative tool for managers and their team to create healthy, impactful relationships and battle toxicity in their workplaces. Alison, I could have used you as some of my last jobs. I don't know where you were. Alison possesses over 2 decades of experience in strategy, information architecture, UX design, product, marketing, and supporting startups. Her career is marked by impactful achievements such as leading the Target app's relaunch for increased engagement and digital revenue. And amidst the pandemic, she rebuilt Shutterfly's creative services group, ensuring continuous product photography. Alison expanded the global UX design team at Thomson Reuters, promoting user-centric design worldwide. She's on a mission to make leadership less lonely and more human-centered, accelerating us all towards inclusive workplaces where everyone can thrive. And you can check out Alison's work at designbydesign.co. Alison, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I think this stuff is so important. I'm so excited we're talking about it today. How's it going?
Hey, Jeremy. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I don't think I've heard someone just go through my intro like that, and I sound really awesome. I hope I can fit the expectations.
Yeah, right before this, you actually sent me the bio. I hadn't read through it.
You had not. You did such a good job.
Thank you. As I was reading, I was like, damn, Alison's a badass. I am so excited I got her on. So, Alison, I know I read that bio a little bit, but tell us a little bit more about you. I'm kind of interested. You've obviously done a whole lot. And you've experienced going from IC to leadership and everything else. So how'd you make that transition? Tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll hop into the topic at hand.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you did a great job reading that bio. What's not in there is that I'm a Scottish transplant to Minneapolis in Minnesota. So as people listen to this and they're questioning, like, where is she from? This is the accent that comes up if you're part Irish, part Scottish, and then move to the Midwest.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask you something that this is sort of funny. I was going to wait until the end, but we had talked, God, it seems like months ago.
Yeah.
And we've had to reschedule this a whole lot. And then I asked you for your bio and you said, I'll send you a wee bio. And I was like, wee? I was like, I don't remember her being Scottish. I thought she was from Minneapolis.
Yeah, I feel like it's usually, if I'm presenting something and I say, does anyone have any questions? It's usually the first question. People are like, where are you from? But I just spent 2 weeks over in Scotland enjoying the summer with my family on the beach. We do have beaches in Scotland and people go in the sea.
I don't think I knew that. Well, I knew there was an ocean, but
yeah,
beaches,
great fun. And I guess what's not in the bio is that I kind of fell into leadership accidentally. I was right there as the UX industry first became known as UX and boomed. And so stepped up very immediately and organically into leading other people. But no one really taught me how to do that. And I was used to creating work and was on a creative director track at first, but then turning into leading people and designing teams for effective working relationships became my new medium very quickly. And I loved figuring out all the ins and outs of facilitation and how to help humans make things for people became more interesting to me than some of the design details. But it took a lot of personal growth along the way to realize what I was terrible at as I made that transition and to figure out who I wanted to be as a manager who is still a maker in some ways, but that started to look really different in the day-to-day.
That's so cool. And I love in your bio too, you talk about like bringing human-centered approach to leadership. And I think a lot of times, especially in big corporations, one of the big complaints you hear about people at large corporations, they feel like a number. They don't feel like they have a voice. And I love that you're bringing that to your training and your workshop. So we're talking today all about this idea of knowing when to move up. Well, actually, it's interesting because we say up, and maybe we even talk a little bit about this because is moving to management really up? It's kind of interesting. We just assume it's sort of climbing the ladder and the next logical step. But I think you've got some interesting perspectives that, it's not just a linear path forward. It's there could be some interesting sideways or whatever. So I'm excited to talk about that. So the first, maybe a way to kick us off, I want to talk about this idea of individual contributor versus management. And I'm the best designer, so logically I would be the best manager. They're not really the same. Talk a little bit about that if you could.
Yeah, and I think it's related to the ladder, right? Like we think of a career ladder and we think of this moment in time where we have to choose between craft and stepping into management. And I like to challenge both myself and everyone around me to not think of it as a linear thing anymore. The way that our industry has evolved, especially in the past, say, 5-ish years, is there's so many more ways to continue to feel progress and even traditional upward momentum while staying on a craft track, like having titles, including principal, staff, and even distinguished. You can stay on the craft track while still, taking on more complex projects, taking on more responsibility, and being compensated in increasing measures as well, without having to take on the responsibility of managing people, caring for people, and the administrative burden that comes along with being an official people manager. So I do think of it a bit differently than many of us grew up thinking of this traditional career ladder, although the language still sticks around where we talk about moving up. But really, I like to think of side steps or choosing to go where the fun is and where the joy is.
Go where the fun is. I like that.
By thinking of it more like a playground and a collection of experiences in your career in its totality. And career as a word, I'm a bit of an etymology nerd, like study of words, love crosswords. And I actually looked up, where does the word career even come from recently?
Yeah.
You'll never guess, but it's based in the French language. And it actually comes from when knights used to joust and career towards each other. And it was a differentiation from careening, because careening is side to side, whereas career was in a straight line. And this was the direction that, and the speed and the momentum that the horses had during jousting is where this word comes from.
Interesting. Okay.
Super weird, super nerdy.
I got a whole side tangent we can go off on later, but I'll save that for another time.
Yeah. So it comes from this idea of permanence, though, like the horse is on its track. It's going this way. It's got momentum. It's forward. And even if you look up the dictionary version of the definition, it's about permanence, like having a permanent calling in your vocation. And I just challenge that these days because we don't have a lot of permanence in our roles, in our companies. Really, the tenure of what people used to think of as like 30 years at one company, and you're constantly moving up based on your tenure, that's a myth. I don't see that anywhere these days. What you do see is the average tenure of both executives and millennials being about 2.5 years. And companies aren't loyal to their employees, as we've been seeing the past few years in this industry. So I question the word career, and I question thinking of it as one linear experience.
That analogy too, like two knights jousting, there's also, I don't know if this is maybe part of that word, but there's this sort of battle, there's this antagonism implied there too, where someone else is winning and I'm losing, and so there's this sort of power dynamic there that's sort of implied by that. The history of that word, at least, was sort of interesting. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but we often think about like winning the promotion or winning the whatever.
Very
and it's like I'm gonna be exactly. That's the word I was looking for. I couldn't think of the word. But yeah, that's kind of interesting. I don't know if that has like anything to do with it, but for me, when I feel that way, it makes everything less fun. It makes it less enjoyable. It's not like I don't enjoy my job anymore. And you mentioned before going where the fun is and going where you the sort of path of, I don't know, I'm kind of thinking in my head, path of least resistance or path of going with the flow where I want to be. I don't know. I just kind of thought about that. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but that was sort of just something I thought about.
It's also like, from what I understand of jousting, and I'm not an expert jouster by any means, but you're kind of playing a game of chicken with someone else, right? And the word career comes from this like path with momentum towards bashing into someone else. And I think in part that sentiment does come through, because we still think of many careers as like you have to get a one-up on somebody, you have to beat someone else, the positions are limited. And it does come with that kind of sense of ickiness, which has never really sat right with me. And I think I always questioned, I've never had a 5-year plan in my career. I just always went with what was interesting, where I could learn new things or take on bigger and meatier challenges. And that came for me with stepping up into leading bigger and bigger teams. But it was at a certain point that I realized I had not intentionally chosen to go into management. And even though I became quite good at it, I was terrible at it at first, and no one helped me figure out how to be a decent manager to the other humans. But it became a craft in and of itself. But it wasn't an intentional choice for me to step up into it. And I don't know if it really leveraged the best of my strengths.
Yeah, I do want to come back to this idea of management as a craft and as a skill, and the lack of training for people to be good managers. But before we do that, I actually want to go back to this idea that you briefly mentioned this, but the idea of a playground.
Yeah.
And I just want to dig into this a little bit. Do you have kids?
I do. I have an almost 12-year-old and an almost 5-year-old. So I spend a lot of time at park.
Okay. You're at the playground a lot. All right. So I got an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. And the thing that I think is fascinating with this analogy is the kids are bouncing around from thing to thing to thing every couple of minutes, just like you said, maybe 2 years we're staying a thing and we bounce around. I just had last week, I just had an episode where we talked about this idea of going broad in your career before you niche down, right? And what I just make that connection of trying out the swings, trying out the slide, going on the monkey bars, going on this other thing, the spinny thing, the thing, bopping back, back and forth, the seesaw, this, and then going back and trying all these things. And I think about my kid who couldn't do the monkey bars, and he would try and he'd fail, and he'd get up and he'd try, and every time he'd go a little bit further, And so this idea of trying it out, failing, maybe you come back, you go do the slide for a little bit, you come back, and then you try it again. We always thought about just climbing the ladder, but I love this analogy. And I'm just picturing my kids running around the playground, ADHD, just hopping back and forth, trying different things, and then eventually getting it, they finally get across and they're so excited. And I don't know, that analogy just sticks with me.
It brings back the joy and the fun into it. And also, I think, opens up. I mean, in Minneapolis, we have so many amazing parks, and some of them are even themed, right? Where there's a Ninja Warrior type thing. And there's another park near me where 2 kids can run and it tracks their time, this is a little competitive, but such different parks too. So everyone's can be unique, and you get to kind of create your own. I also think kids just have so little judgment about what other kids are doing in the playground and who enjoys what. And, they're actually, it's so interesting to see them get into little conflicts or make friends and create new imaginary games in the playground. And if we tie all that back to career paths, I think it opens up a perspective, being able to think of your career as something that you enjoy doing, something that you get to play with, try new things out. As you were saying, build the muscles for something that you really want to do, but then try something completely different without any judgment or feeling shoulded by yourself, maybe what you saw your parents or other people do growing up. You get to kind of carve your own path through it.
I love that. I'm just thinking so many things, the multiple playgrounds and everything else, and the different equipment. And I don't know, there's a whole blog post, I think, in there probably. Or
I'd love to read it. I'd love your perspective on it, because I think the metaphor has a lot of legs and a lot of different ways to think about it.
I was thinking you could write that. I don't know if I'm going to write it. I'll let you write it. I'll read your insights on it.
It'll be a collab.
All right. I like that. So I want to talk a little bit about this idea now about, the lack of training. And we talked a little bit before, maybe we could expand on this first, but this idea of, being really good at your craft is one thing. Being a manager, you mentioned this yourself, you were not very good at it when you first started and you had to build that muscle up. I wonder if you could maybe just talk a little bit about, from your experience, or maybe even just some advice for other people who are maybe thinking about this, is being the best designer on the team does not mean you'll make a good manager.
Nope.
Talk to me a little bit about that idea, and is there some kind of way for someone to know, how would I actually know if I want to be a manager? How would I know if I'd be a good manager? What are your thoughts there when you're coaching? What do you tell people when they're thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, I come back to joy. What do people actually enjoy doing every day? What are the things that deplete your energy as well? And just taking a step back and considering, is this something I actually want, and why? Or is this something I think I should want because I perceive it to have prestige, or I think it will come with a higher salary? And some of these things are myths these days, especially with the pathways possible staying in IC. But if, for example, the worst part of your job every day is having to sort of negotiate and facilitate across stakeholders, or you really struggle and do not like giving even tough feedback, these are things that are going to become a huge part of your day-to-day when you step into any kind of management position. So if you know that those things just aren't in line with your vibe, that would be where I would really pause and say, why do I think I want to step into management? What do I think it's going to get me? And a lot of ICs that I maybe work with as they're trying to get into their first management role, they think that when I step up to a manager, everyone's going to listen to me. I'm going to have more power. I'm going to be able to get the work done that I want to get done at X company. The myth there to bust is that everyone's a middle manager. Nobody really has decision-making power.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
And so you start getting into this expectation that all of a sudden the no's will turn to yeses, or people will listen to your genius. But a lot of the time, you actually are then dealing with more complex factors that you have to juggle. And your point of view and your opinion can even become more watered down while you try and figure out these solutions that fit all of the factors that you're juggling. So there's a few myths to bust there. If you love the people part of your job, the peopling, and even as an introvert, you love sort of the people side of it and setting up the work for success and helping humans be the best they can be at the workplace, then management might be for you, because you're going to think through those things as design problems and spend a lot of your time doing the peopling.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so I'm thinking about this like from my own personal career. I've been doing UX design for a long time, but I've always been an individual contributor. And so I've been team lead, I've been UX lead, I've led teams, I've led strategy, I've actually, given the hard feedback when I had to fire somebody once on a research trip, but I was never an actual manager, HR type, dealing with promotions and stuff. And one of the reasons for me personally why I've never really been interested in going that route was I didn't want to be the person people came to and asked about raises. And I didn't want to be the person that people complained about not getting promoted on time and having to deal with those kinds of things. But I liked the other aspect of it. And I kind of found that niche of sort of like a blend, I guess, a hybrid of managing the work without managing the people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of been my thing. I've always to me, I've been lucky to have worked at places where they had staff and senior staff and principals. So
that's great.
Work my way up on IC without having to go up the management route. But a lot of people, I don't think, are really in that position where they've been able to sort of do that leadership IC role versus leadership manager role. And I'm kind of curious, maybe talk about that a little bit. If someone's in a position where they've hit a ceiling, and the only way they can make more money is to become a manager. When you're working with clients like that, what do you normally say?
I mean, honestly, I would look at, is it really the only way to make more money? Or do I need to just go ask for more money? Because I really do think companies can and do detach title from the money side of things. Yes, there's going to be a range, and it may even be published and you can see it, right? Like your potential salary range in a certain position. Those are guidelines, right? And yes, there are certain things that, if you're right at the top of that range, maybe it's going to be harder to get an outstanding raise every year, et cetera. But they're guidelines. And you don't get what you don't ask for. So if your main motivation in considering management, and maybe it feels like the only track where you're at, I would question a couple things before stepping up into it. I would also say, give it a try, right? I think you learn so much about yourself and what you enjoy and how you influence other people by just trying it out. And I think more and more, for good and for bad reasons, people are put in these player coach roles, especially at the first management sort of level. You're still going to have some hands-on opportunities. You're still going to be able to maintain that portfolio of work that lets you take that side step back onto the IC track if you decide that management isn't right for you. It's only really once you've been sitting in management for 10, 15 years and you no longer have that portfolio of proof that you would be an awesome lead designer again, or even senior designer again, it gets really hard to take that side step because people perceive it as a step down. Even if you're like, no, I really want to get back closer to the work and here's all my skills and here's my Figma files, like you can see I can still do this stuff. But people still have a lot of perceptions and hesitations letting people take those different side steps back.
Again, I'm kind of like going back to this idea of the playground. And,
Yeah.
you know, I decide I really like the slide. And I just keep going, and that's all I'm doing is the
Yep.
slide. You know, after a certain amount of time, let's say I do that for years, I forget how to do the monkey bars.
Exactly.
And trying to then go back and say, like, do the monkey. So in this case, sort of like, again, you know, before you lose those skill, like go
Keep
back
them
and forth
fresh.
and find that. I love the idea of the player coach. And the last place I worked for a long time, they started changing it up towards the end, which I think was great. But for a long time, they had a very strict delineation between dotted line and solid line managers, where, you know, your solid line manager, you went to them with promotions and raised questions and HR problems and blah, blah, blah. And those people were never involved with the work. And then there were leads that led the stuff. And, you know, you didn't go to them if you needed to get a raise. You went to your HR manager. They started to kind of blend those lines a little bit, which I think is, for me personally, one of the reasons why I always tended to stay away from HR type manager roles, because I didn't want to deal with the HR BS. But then towards the end, they started to blend those lines a little bit, probably because they were trying to, you know, decrease payroll and have more people do more work. Yeah, absolutely. But for the managers though, it was you know, nice to have some of them be more hands-on and do the actual work. So they could put that in a portfolio if they wanted to, you know, because they were actually leading the work. And I think that's something kind of to think about, something that I'm kind of thinking about in my head. You know, I feel like when people go and they start a career, a lot of them aren't really, like you mentioned, 5-year plan. They're not really thinking ahead. And I'm just sort of curious if this is something someone's thinking about. How can someone be more proactive at the beginning when they're looking for a job so that they can understand what options they may have and say, you know, I hit a certain level, I can't go past whatever, or the bands, like you said, and the pay raises or pay bands. I'm curious, is there some kind of way someone can be proactive when they're looking for a job so that several years down the road, they don't feel stuck?
Such a good question. And I would be proactively asking in interviews, like, tell me about a time where you recently promoted someone internally to the highest position possible in your department. What was that? How did they get there? What were their options? Like, ask questions, or even ask, like, could I get a look at your progression framework? Right. And some companies will quite happily get you those, and you can take a look at them, not as like a checklist or a promise or a guarantee of things, but it gives you an indication of how much they've been thinking about it. So I do think asking for examples, or tell me about, you know, how you continuously develop people, even once they are very senior in their career, or once they've been there for 8 years, 10 years, and see what they say. If they don't have an answer, maybe no one lasts that long, or maybe people do get stuck and they haven't solved that problem.
So something that I experienced, and honestly, I fell into this. It was a complete accident, but I got a job, and I worked at startups for a long time in my career. I ended up getting a job at a giant multinational conglomerate, and found through just one-on-ones with people that they had these leadership trainings and courses I could take. And they would send you to this big fancy resort up in upstate New York for a week and wine and dine and treat you. Yeah. And like learn all these leadership skills and things. And like, it blew my mind. I started taking these courses. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Why don't more people know about this? And so for me, that was something. Now, whenever I go anywhere, I'm asking, do you guys have leadership training? Do you offer like, maybe you're not going to send me to New York like the last place, but you know, even if it's remote, you know, I'm curious, those kinds of things. What should people be looking for if that is something that they are interested in? Is there a specific vocabulary you should be using that would maybe trigger these things in an HR person instead of just saying leadership training? How would someone go about asking that and figuring that out?
Yeah. And especially if you're considering management or you want to get into management for the first time, the question I would be asking is there leadership training available for aspiring managers? Is there training available that helps me prepare for that position? Because what I've noticed, at least at the very large companies I've worked for, is those trainings are amazing, but they're sometimes gate-kept by level, and they're not available for the first-time manager or sort of the, senior manager level. Maybe they're gate kept at director or even senior director. The same goes for having an executive coach alongside you to help you transition or go through these big leadership steps. Sometimes they're not available at the scaled management levels until a company is like, no, we're going to invest in a director level or even a VP level. I don't think that's right because, there's plenty of studies, most notably Gallup in 2024 or this year, they find, 75% of an employee's engagement and happiness at work is based on the manager, right? And all of our managers don't get training on how to be the best humans while they navigate the new stressors of management, how they're going to juggle, the player and coach, how to tackle conflict. All of these things that just go with the territory are usually stuff you learn either by deciding what you don't want to be like or by trial and error on the other humans. And so much or a high percentage of your enjoyment at work is based on that manager relationship, but those managers really aren't set up for success. So there's other options, and I would take it into your own hands. I'm biased. I have a couple courses that really are aimed at helping people step into and grow as leaders while also being good humans and being a part of creating good workplaces. There's also, many, many leadership trainings out there if you just give it a Google. But the first thing I would do is see what your job offers. And then even if it's gate kept at a certain title, I would still ask. And I would ask again, and I would ask again, and just kind of keep it on the radar. Or if you're stepping into that management position externally, maybe it's something that you include in your job negotiations as you're negotiating an offer.
I love that.
Is you want additional support from an executive coach, or you want them to fund leadership training for you. And that's something you can include in the negotiations too.
I love that. Yeah. And from my own personal experience, a lot of times going to these because they were expensive. Like I said, they're sending you their airfare, they basically hotel, food and everything for a week. On top of the training costs, there are very few. Mm-hmm. So they're nominated. So you have to be nominated to go to these things. And what I found is if someone speaks up, they'll get nominated because most other people wouldn't want to do it. So the manager's not going to go and shop this around generally because they have other stuff to do, right? So who do they give it to? The person who asked.
Yes.
It's a lot of times it is that simple. It's just, the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
You don't get what you don't ask for.
It's unfortunate because I feel like I got so much value out of these training courses and, they were very exclusive because you had to go, but I wish that they just did them remotely. And, I think there's a lot of value in some of these on-sites though, where it gets you out of your normal environment.
I think it does help.
You don't have to worry about picking up kids. You don't have to worry about making dinner. You don't have to worry about, screaming and yelling and everything that happens in the background. And so you get out of your own environment, and it's a great opportunity to network with people in your company and stuff as well. Huge advantage. I mean, I personally love those. Probably one of the things I miss the most about that. Like they did end up selling it, which is unfortunate, but towards the end, try to save money. But anyway, it was pretty fun. So yeah, just ask. I mean, that's something like I think is it's sort of obvious when you say it out loud, but just so few people are just like, I think this is maybe something too. It's just expectations, right? Like if you don't make your expectations known and you assume people are going to do a certain thing and they don't meet your expectations, that's not on them, that's on you.
Absolutely. And, there's a few hesitations why people don't ask is they think that their hard work will be noticed, recognized, and rewarded. And I wish that was true, but people, including myself as a manager, it's like, you got stuff going on, you're thinking about yourself. It's hard to remember all of the sort of potential that your team wants and has. And honestly, when a direct report is crystal clear with me about what they want, we can have a good conversation about it, and I can be a part of being an ally and helping them get that. Even being frank about, hey, what's in your way of getting that? What do you need to build the muscle on, just like the monkey bars, so that you're a no-brainer candidate the next time a promotion is being discussed? What are the things you need to do over the next 6, 9, 12 months to make sure that it's a no-brainer and you're going to get that opportunity, or at least get the chance to interview for it, especially at bigger companies? And so asking, bringing it up, not being afraid to remind without feeling, try to avoid that. But I asked 3 weeks ago and it hasn't happened yet. These things take time, but just get on the radar and be on the radar, and then the opportunities will start to come.
Yeah. So I want to let's talk a little bit more about this, because this, we mentioned this asking piece, but I'm curious from your perspective. Let's say you do decide you want to try this out. You want to play on the monkey bars for a little while. What are some ways that, your leaders can help you? Obviously, we just talked about asking. Is that it? Or are there other ways that, you can help your leaders help you to get there?
Yeah. Well, I think a couple things. One is your leader can help you get stretch assignments that will prove you have the muscles at whether it's the management level you're trying to get to, or even if you're just trying to get a promotion in general. Having that frank conversation with your leader and saying like, hey, I want to get to principal designer. What is the gap between what you see me consistently demonstrating now and what would make me a awesome candidate for promotion or a no-brainer? I love the no-brainer language because it's really non-confrontational and it invites your leader into a conversation versus puts them on the spot to have a concrete answer. So what would make me a no-brainer candidate? What gaps do I need to fill? And then in every quarterly development status or however you're connecting with your leader, what's coming up in the next 3 to 6 months that I could tackle for you that would demonstrate these skills, whether it's more strategic thinking or ability to handle ambiguity or complexity, are typically things that you need to show competence in before a promotion will occur. The other maybe myth and thing to say out loud right now is that promotions tend to be retroactive. They are not based on butt in seat time, right? Like, I've been a mid-level designer for 20 years, therefore I deserve to become a principal designer. That's really old ways of thinking. Typically, it's so-and-so's outperforming consistently the expectations of the seat they're in. They've raised the fact that they want to take on more responsibility. They want to progress. They want to move upwards, air quotes. And then you have to be consistently demonstrating and already there for the promotion to occur.
I love that. And something that I think this goes back to, again, the expectations, right? When you think about senior designer at company A and senior designer at company B often do completely different things. So how does, someone know I am meeting the expectations of said band if you're not having those normal conversations, regular conversations with the people who decide those things? You can't just go on Google and say, what's a senior designer expectation? It's not like brain surgeon or something. You can just Google and a brain surgeon at one hospital is basically the same as a brain surgeon at another. It's not like that.
Yeah.
And I've talked to so many people that do not have regular one-on-ones with their supervisor or manager. And it blows my mind. How on earth do you do your job when you're not talking to your boss on a regular basis?
I don't know, but I did recently see a stat, I think it was from Gallup as well, that it's just over 50% of people talk about their career goals with their boss once a year.
50%. That is nuts.
And I think people are also mistiming those conversations or putting so much weight on them that they feel really big instead of small, continuous iteration. And again, if you're not on the same page with your boss, they can't help you.
Yeah.
And so you do need to sort of lower the pressure on yourself to have those conversations, lower the pressure on your boss from you, right? Because your boss is a human too. They're going to want to avoid a difficult conversation. If you want to talk about why you're not promoted yet every 2 weeks, they're going to start avoiding that regardless of their radically candid philosophies. But the most important thing is you both being on the same page. And I actually just earlier today kicked off my manager foundations course. And one of the first things we do is build a manager profile where you rate your expertise and your mastery on things like comfort with ambiguity, strategic thinking, ability to grow others, demonstrate results, things like this. And the students were talking about how they now want to take this tool to their boss and say, how would you rate me on these things?
That's awesome. Yeah.
Because the amazing conversation and the really fruitful, like good information to have is where the gaps are.
Yeah. I was just thinking that too, because I'm just thinking in my head as you're filling it out, usually people tend to be more biased upon their own actions and think they're better at things than other people perceive them to be. And the first thing I thought was, I wonder what their boss says.
Yeah.
So that's so something I just want to go back to real quick before I forget. You mentioned timing, and we started talking more about general promotions and raises, but even if we're talking about the stretch assignments and things like that, something that I learned probably way later than I should have was, just like you said, asking for those things at the wrong time. So as an example from my personal, we would do year-end reviews usually towards the end of the fiscal year, which was in January or February after Christmas and stuff.
Yep.
And so what would happen is, if you went and tried to ask for a raise, then that was the end of the fiscal year. They had already started doing the budget planning and things well in advance. If you wanted to get in there, you had to start doing that mid-year so that your request could be added. We called it S2. I don't even know what S2 stood for, but it was S2. Everyone's like, oh, we got S2 coming up. So that basically, like, you had to get that in there before the budgeting and stuff, which was like in November or so, so that those assignments could be given money or a budget or open a thing or approve a raise, because
100%.
there's often we've got limited resources in there. Your manager wants to give everybody a 1,000,000% raise, but they can't.
Yeah, this is not Oprah where she says, you get a car, you get a car,
exactly.
You get a car. We can't promote everyone to the max every single year. I mean, that just wouldn't be good business. And I think that's important to recognize. If we did that, all of our departments would be far too expensive. And so that's what your bosses and bosses are all juggling, is how do we help people feel progress, feel like they have momentum in their career, give them bigger challenges, answer their requests for promotion with clear expectations and exceeding the expectations or meeting them, while also managing the budget that just got cut, perhaps, or that has to reduce, or sometimes the number of promotions you can do is also tied to the raise pool of money, right? So you have to make tough choices of, do people get raises or promotions, or what's the mix? But you're totally right. Those conversations, and they are incredibly complex, are happening in the fall. So the timing, and this has always felt a little harmful to me, actually, about annual reviews and self-reviews. By the time you put this effort into your self-review, which you have to do, it's too late. The case has already been made. And so this is where I think having the continuous conversation with your boss, being on the radar, even thinking of it as a little bit of a PR campaign with your boss's peers and the boss's boss, you want to already be known as a high potential person, as someone who has appetite of taking more on, someone who is seeking out stretch assignments. Like, you want to be starting that probably a year before you are going to get promoted. And that is a lot longer of a lead time than people expect.
Exactly. And that's the other thing that I think is just worth calling out here is, if anything, if you get anything out of this conversation, it's that regardless of what you want, you've got to be very clear about it and ask for it. And I love what you're saying is like a PR campaign where you're just constantly promoting, and the allies, finding the peers of your boss who have their ear that can then influence them. And, it's sort of like, when we talk about UX design, I like to talk about stakeholder management. It's sort of stakeholder management instead of influencing feature development. You're influencing your career in a way, right? So so many people, I think, ignore the idea that you can, and you mentioned this before, taking a design approach, UX your career, right? Where whether that's, before you get a job, while you're job hunting, while you have the job, we talk about empathy for users, empathy for your boss, empathy for stakeholders, and understanding what they can do, what they can't do, what they're, that's just like, if you get one thing out of it, any of this thing today, I think that hopefully that's it. I love that. So I'm curious. One last question. I do want to follow this up. You mentioned before, we talked about this idea of doing something for a long time, losing that other muscle. So I'm curious, let's say you do decide to become a manager. You try it out for a little while, and none of this is for you, but you've been doing the management thing for a few years and you don't have the work in your portfolio. How do you keep that portfolio current so that you can hop to the jungle gym over or whatever and not have to be worried about losing that muscle? Do you have any advice for people that might be in that position?
Oh, I'm sure people will have advice for me on this topic, because I definitely, have even experienced this in terms of tools and what designers are using. I've never used smart objects in Figma or whatever they're called in Figma, right? So very, very quickly, everyone's looking for 10 years of experience using Figma, which has not been around that long. Whereas I'm perfectly able to use things like OmniGraffle that are not even used anymore. Or I started out in Quark Express, for example. So part of it as well is tool aptitude, right? And the tools are always changing. There'll be a new one that we're all on in the next year. But that starts to become the question is, well, can you use the tools? I also think just doing whatever you can to have recent projects. I've always been a maker and had little side hustles, or now I run my own business and do all my own materials there. And so I suddenly have some really recent portfolio stuff. And I also have examples of really complex initiatives that are more akin to information architecture projects, but that are from the administration of leadership.
Okay, I love that.
So I think you can still create case studies about artifacts you made and how you approached problems or brought stakeholders to the table for things. But you have to put, I think, a little bit more effort into translating those things into portfolios. But I absolutely will take advice from the audience on how to tell that story.
Right, yeah.
I do like to tell people, own your story, right? So if you have been in management for 10 years and you've decided you want to step back into a senior level individual contributor, tell that story. Why? And tell it in a positive light, right? That you want to get back closer to the work, or you've been excited by XYZ and you're looking for the opportunity to do that. And you understand that your salary may or may not fit. You're aware that you might be taking a step sideways or down in compensation. I think being really upfront about that is good. I think also when you're trying to make those moves on the job market, it's going to be who you know that will trust that you are ready and willing to make that step. I know the couple times I've thrown my resume in on things, when I've had those sort of solopreneur doubts, it immediately gets rejected for anything, because it's like, well, you're overqualified. You don't like to make stuff. Yeah. It's like, no, I really love making stuff.
I was gonna mention the O word, overqualified. Yeah. So, I'm 42. I've got the gray hair in my beard, and I got laid off in December, and I was trying to find work. I've eventually said, screw it, I'm going to make my own job, started a consultancy, which I've found the knowing people has helped a lot more there than I thought it would, getting me the actual work, but probably better off for it, I think. But the overqualified thing, I think ageism is huge. And I think it's real. When you have been, in that management role for a while and someone looks at your resume and they see that, why do you want this job? Why do you want this job? Like that kind of thing. You've been doing this management. Why would you want to get back to an IC? And I think that's something to grapple with. I don't know if you have any advice there, but that's just something that I've seen firsthand. I'm sure lots of other people know exactly what I'm talking about.
I've seen it firsthand too. I've not solved it, but I too have just started embracing. I took a leap and decided to be independent. I allow myself to be intrigued once a week by a job description that sounds really cool. But when I have thrown my resume in the ring, it's immediate ding. And knowing everything that's going on in the UX industry right now, I've just created a different pathway for myself, which I find really fulfilling. Am I making the same amount that I was as a design VP? No. But my quality of life is a lot higher.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. It's funny because back when I was working all the time, I picked my kids up from aftercare 5 o'clock. And now I work for myself. I pick the kids up 3:30, 4 o'clock. It's awesome.
Yeah.
What do you want to go to the park? Let's go play. Let's go try all the stuff out. Go to my monkey bars. But the quality, I definitely don't make, but luckily my wife still is gainfully employed. So she's the breadwinner. So I don't have to worry about it. I'm like the trophy husband now. I get to go pick the kids up and we go to the park and all that stuff. That. But All right, Alison, so we've had you for a little while. I've got some questions that I like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. But before we do that, any closing thoughts, anything we didn't get a chance to talk about that you want people to know about management versus IC?
The one thing I hope people take away is to do what's right for you and to want what you want. And that might be wanting to stay close to the craft and the making without getting into so much people stuff. Or it may be really wanting to be fully coaching others and stepping into that. And you don't mind that you'll be a little bit further from the work. Want what you want and learn how to articulate it so that you can advocate for yourself, bring other people along, and carve out that path to whatever it is.
This has been an amazing conversation. I think so many people out there, they just assume management next step, but I just love the idea of just thinking about that.
Playground.
Find the companies where you can grow as an individual contributor. Look for companies before you get the job that have staff, senior staff, principal on up. And, this is something, we didn't mention this before, but something maybe thinking about is when you're doing the interview process, during the interview process, ask the HR rep or the recruiter about the bands and what's the levels and all those things. And those should be part of those conversations that you have, before you decide that you want this job, because not every company does that. So I think that's really important. All right. Awesome. So Alison,
sure.
I've got a few questions I like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. You don't have to think about these too long. First thing comes to your mind.
Quick fire.
First up, what is your favorite non-design book?
Oh gosh, why is that hard? I'm just going to give a genre. And the first thing that comes to mind is romantasy.
Romantasy, okay.
Smutty fantasy romance books.
Okay.
It's escapism. And gosh, I just love escaping into these worlds that are crafted. And yeah, that is like 90% of what I've been listening to outside of business and design books has been smutty romantasy.
So, okay, how about like Danielle Steele and things like that? Is that kind of what you're thinking of? Or is that?
I don't know if she does fantasy work. Sarah J. Maas and the A Court of Thorn and Roses.
Okay, all right. Oh, like elves and like elves and things like that,
elves,
like fantasy
fairies,
kind of. Okay.
Dragons,
all right.
Bring it on. I love it.
So it's like if Danielle Steele wrote a book with like J.R.R. Tolkien or something like that, it would be, I had no idea these books even existed.
Oh, it's a whole, if you go onto like TikTok or Book Talk, it's a whole rabbit hole you can go down.
Are these audiobooks too?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. Are they in character and stuff? Are these like in character with sound effects and?
Oh, there's no sound effects, but the voice actors really do add a lot.
I need to check this out.
As a parent with young kids, I don't have a ton of time in the evening. I love physical books, but I have a stack and a Barnes and Noble membership and too many books. But the way that I get through probably a book a week at least is audiobooks. While I'm cooking, while I'm walking, while I'm sitting at the park, watching them do their monkey bars. But it's all been really escapist romantasy books this year.
Romantasy. I love that. I've never heard of that. I thought you were making that up, but that's a real thing. All right. What is your favorite non-design podcast?
There is a great podcast called Maintenance Phase by Aubrey Gordon and a gentleman whose name I'm forgetting. But what they do is they dig deep into the research behind both health and body positivity and anti-fatness. And they bust all of these like diet crazes, and they look at sort of factual evidence-based medicine behind all of these things. And they are hilarious, absolutely hilarious. Okay. And I learned so much. And I laugh out loud when I'm listening to Maintenance Phase.
I have to check it out. All right. I love that. I've never heard of it. I love that kind of stuff too. I'm going to check it out. So I mentioned before when you were talking about the etymology of the word career, there's a podcast that you may or may not be interested in. If you're interested in etymology, there's the History of English podcast.
I shall have to look at that one.
Oh my God. So it's the history of the English language.
Yeah.
And it's a history podcast, but also about language as well. So they kind of intermingles history of, Britain and America and England and stuff. and, the French coming over in 1066 and how they brought, Middle English evolved from French and the mixing of French and English and Norse and all these other languages. Anyway, fascinating.
Yeah.
My wife couldn't care less about it. I've told her all these random facts and she's just like, I don't care. I have no interest.
Oh, yeah. No, my family does not get into the crosswords like I do. But my favorite etymology podcast is called The Allusionist with an A. And I love it. And she's even done a couple live shows. I've just not quite made it to them. But even when it comes to technology or our careers, there's all sorts of words that we use, to log in on a computer comes from the captain's log. And the reason it was called a log was because they would literally throw a piece of wood over the side that was attached by a rope with knots in it, which is where the measurement of knots comes from.
Oh my God, no way. Holy crap.
That's at least what I heard on this podcast one time.
No shit. That's really interesting. Well, you might dig the History of English podcast.
Okay.
Check it out. Amy, my friend and former guest, Amy Santee, career coach,
Amy.
and she's got a podcast. Yeah, Amy's awesome. She's the one who told me about the History of English podcast. So anyway, fantastic podcast. You might dig it. All right. What is your favorite meal? This could be something you've cooked, something your grandma used to cook, something you've had at a restaurant. Favorite meal?
I make a really yummy curry with butternut squash and just a ton of, I throw whatever vegetables we have are in it. And it's my 4-year-old's favorite meal.
Really? Wow.
So that has become my favorite meal. It always works out. And yet it always tastes a little bit different.
Yeah, of course. You never know.
Yeah.
You throw a little of this, a little of that. My kids hate curry. Anytime I make anything curry, they hate it. They won't eat it.
My son doesn't eat it.
I don't understand. It's not even spicy. I mean, it's I don't know. My kids are bizarre eaters. They won't eat French fries. They won't eat mashed potatoes, which most kids, it's all they eat.
Yeah.
They won't eat pizza sauce on a pizza. So I have to get just cheese and bread.
My son won't eat cheese on a pizza.
So it's funny. I have one kid who won't eat the sauce. I have the other kid who doesn't eat the dough. So I'm like, why are we even going to get pizza? I don't even understand.
Yeah, pizza not the thing in your household.
Oh, my kids. Anyway, all right. So what is your favorite vacation spot?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I actually just got back from vacation on the east coast of Scotland, which is where, not quite where my family's from, about an hour and a half away. But we go every year. We try to go and we get all the sort of cousins together, sort of multiple generations
awesome.
of cousins and kids, and get to the beach and have amazing fish and chips. And I eat gluten-free, and there were even amazing gluten-free fish and chips on the Fife coast in Scotland. And that is going to be my favorite place because it's just chill, easy, family. And believe it or not, there's beaches and the kids just dig giant holes.
I love it. Scotland's not a place I would have associated with beaches.
Well,
I know the UK.
Hot.
Yeah, it's cold. Right. But I'm sure it's beautiful, the cliffs and stuff, right?
Gorgeous.
That's all
Gorgeous.
Beautiful. Yeah. So do you have a lot of family in the States, or is everybody in the UK or Europe?
Everyone's in the UK, or really, I have extended family all over the world. We've been a very transient folk. But yeah, all my immediate family, my sisters and parents are there. And so, yeah, we try to get back at least once a year. And the kids are just expert travelers now. We are trying to think of where can we go that feels maybe a bit different in terms of a vacation, maybe the Bahamas at some point, or take the kids to Mexico. So we're thinking about a different style of vacation where it is actually warmer and, people bring you margaritas on the beach.
Nothing wrong with that. I love that. I have to do some tips on how to get my kids to cooperate long enough to sit in an airplane and fly across the
melatonin.
world. Drug them up. Whiskey. No, I'm kidding. I don't do that. Anybody listening? So I've never flown with both of my kids. I've flown with one of them nonstop. It was a quick 45-minute flight when they were 2. But I've never tried to take both of them.
Wow.
And the idea of going across, going abroad with multiple connecting flights with 2 kids, oh God. I'd rather just not go. I'd rather stay home.
I think, honestly, the same thing is true with managing teams. The more your teams or your kids are exposed to something, the better they become at it.
Yeah, I love that. All right. It's practice, just like anything else, right?
Yeah,
It's a muscle.
you're just
You got to practice.
practicing,
There
and
you
you're
go.
also setting expectations, but I have had some terrible international flights, with a 4-year-old with an ear infection. And
oh my God,
you do wonder, why am I doing this?
I'd rather stay home. Family, it's a powerful bond.
It is.
All right. Last question. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
This may be a little controversial, but as a solopreneur, I've been relying on Canva.
Canva. Okay.
And while I have mixed feelings about the democratization of design, I do think it's an amazing tool because it is enabling so many small businesses, myself included, to be able to express themselves, to be able to create reasonable looking things. The AI tools that the Canva team has integrated in are phenomenal. And I think, honestly, some of the more true design tools could learn a lot from how intuitive it is to be able to get what you need done, collaborate with others, whiteboard, present, download things in ways you want. So that has been my primary tool the past year as an independent, and I kind of like it.
All right, right on. Yeah, I've never played with the pro version of Canva. I've only played with the free version, and it was very limiting. But I've heard a lot of people. You were not the first that has said they like Canva. So I don't know, maybe one of these days I'm going to have to check it out.
I hope no one comes at me in my DM and is like, you're supposed to be a true designer.
What kind of designer uses Canva? I'm just kidding. Well, call me. I'll get you
you'll
back.
go get them.
All right. Yeah, I got them. All right. So Alison, before we get out of here, why don't you give yourself a plug? Let everybody know where they can find you. You mentioned you had a course coming up. Give your course a plug. Let everybody know where they can sign up, and I'll get the deets and all that stuff.
Yeah, you can find all the deets either, follow me and say hello on LinkedIn and on my website, designbydesign.co. You'll get links there to upcoming is a design leadership accelerator. It's really an incubator. We spend 8 weeks together really helping design leaders grow in a lot of the soft skills and get the things out of their way that stop them from progressing. So that's one of the courses that's coming up. The other thing I'm launching is something I'm calling the Good Manager Operating System. And I'm super excited about it because it's a product and a Notion template that's dynamic and helps managers and their team members have more meaningful, productive conversations about continuous development, stretch assignments, how to work well together with deep understanding and less stress. And so that is something that I'm just launching as a beta. And if folks are interested, you can get more information on designbydesign.co.
Now, is this something that you would recommend an individual contributor get so that they can facilitate one-on-ones with their manager? Or is this something you're advocating for managers to get to facilitate conversations with others?
The second way is my first launch. Just like in product development, I'm having to start somewhere.
Yeah,
and so I'm hoping it's a tool that managers will invest in. If you're an individual contributor and you're like, that sounds amazing, hop onto the website and send it to your manager and say, I want to try this with you and I want to build a better relationship with you.
Right on. Yeah, because I could absolutely see this is I guess related to our conversation today, but when I do mentoring, I get a lot of questions about how to conduct one-on-ones. How do I make a one-on-one more meaningful and valuable for me instead of just, showing up, be like, oh, I don't know what to talk about today. How do you make those small 30-minute meetings, usually, if you're lucky, you might not even get 30 minutes, making those as valuable as possible. And I could easily see somebody wanting something to help that conversation, keep track of stuff, a lot of people don't even take notes when they do these one-on-ones. So if they even come with an agenda at all, So anyway, all right. Well, that's cool. Well, so check out designbydesign.co.
.co, very important.
.co, very important.
I tried to get the .com. Looks like the 80s called, and they're sitting on it.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, you win the lottery, pay $1 million, get it. So that's awesome. Alison, thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate the insights. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value out of this. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Well, all right, y'all. That's it for Alison and me for today. I hope we helped to shed a little bit of light on this idea of individual contributor versus management track. Those two things are very different. And just because you're good at one does not mean you will be good at another. But have you tried out the management track? Did you like it? Did you end up going back to individual contributor? If you did, how was that transition? I'd love to know. Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. And if you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, then why don't you tell them about it? That'd be fantastic. Don't forget to check out the Beyond UX Design shop. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to pick up some big, beautiful UX theme art prints. Get your copy of Beyond UX Design, Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes. Get free shipping on all orders over $30. Use the code LISTENER to get 10% off your entire order. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to get your print on. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/support to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Roddy, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free. You'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're released. You can get instant access to those video archives right now for as little as $5 a month. If you've been sitting on building your new website, Wix Studio can help get you there faster. Wix Studio is a powerful platform that lets you create and manage websites easily. With Wix Studio, you can quickly adapt designs for every device, reuse assets, and my favorite, export from Figma and much more. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/Wix to start creating today. And if you want to transform your career from fuzzy to focused, make sure to grab UX Playbook's Fast Track Bundle. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/playbook and use the promo code BEYOND for nearly $25 off all those examples, videos, and tips handcrafted by my buddy Chris Wynn. Remember to sign up for the newsletter. Check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all.
My husband's also a big beard guy, and it is amazing where the hair ends up.